She'd only come to live here in London with him 2 years ago, and they'd been like two strangers sharing a house, not father and daughter. She'd insisted she wanted to do war work, and not just rolling bandages with a group of gossipy ladies. She wasn't trained as a nurse, but hoped she might be accepted as a driver in the voluntary aid detachment. Her friend Bella had driven ambulances. But no, her father said if she became a VAD, she could be sent anywhere in the country at a minute's notice, and that wouldn't be safe. Doing something to help the war effort had been one of the few times she'd held firm against him, though as usual her father had discovered a way of reaching a compromise. He'd obtained an informal job for her as one of a group of ladies organised by Lady Berrens, a close friend of his, telling her she'd be making a difference without having to leave home. And indeed it had been very worthwhile to help ferry wounded officers around London, taking them to hospitals, to see specialist doctors, to visit relatives, whatever was needed to help them in their convalescence. She loved anything connected with motor cars, and intended to buy one of her own as soon as vehicles were being produced again for civilians, but she hadn't told her father that. She had her own money, after all, and if he objected, she'd just do it. The main thing that had tempted her to join Lady Berrens' group had been that she'd have to learn how to drive. Her father had been surprisingly helpful about that, even taking her to the post office himself to obtain her driving licence, and as he paid the 5 shillings it cost, he joked about how expensive she was. Then, as she put the licence carefully away in her leather shoulder bag, he had grimaced and spoilt the mood of the day. "Why do you insist on carrying that huge thing around with you, Georgie? Makes you look like a suffragette. A small, plain handbag would be much more ladylike." He wasn't exactly against women getting the vote, she'd give him that, and indeed he was fairly modern in his attitude towards women, but he disapproved strongly of everything remotely connected with suffragettes, and it was they who'd started the fashion for larger handbags. "A small handbag isn't practical, as I've told you before, Father, and it wouldn't hold even half the things I need for my war work." Not just her purse, handkerchief and notebook, but a brush, comb and spare hairpins, because her long curly hair would come tumbling down at the slightest provocation. She'd have had it cut short, but he'd objected vehemently to that, saying it was her crowning glory. When he'd added without thinking, "as it was your mother's," with a dreamy look in his eyes, Georgie had given in. She knew so little about her real mother, she'd treasured even that small piece of information. She'd pleaded several times for more details of the mother she'd never known, who had died after a difficult birth with twins, but he'd stubbornly shaken his head. It had only taken a few trips to show her how genuinely useful her work was, not just because wounded men needed this sort of help, but also because they usually perked up when they were chatting to a young woman who could make them smile. She carried Fry's chocolate cream bars in the handbag her father despised when she could get them because they were such a convenient size. She'd never met a soldier who didn't welcome a sweet treat. She was still staring enviously out at the celebrating crowds when her father came downstairs again. As she turned round, he stopped in the hall and raised his hand in farewell. She waved back, admiring his trim, upright bearing. He was still a fine figure of a man, even though he was past 60. He looked younger now she'd persuaded him to stop wearing formal morning clothes and a high, starched wing collar. He was carrying a briefcase as usual, even today, and wearing his uniform of neat navy blue suit and felt Homburg. She sat down again, losing herself in thought. Her father had been a distant figure for most of her life, and she'd wondered why he stayed away from them. She'd only found out a couple of years ago that she and her twin brother were the offspring of his mistress, who died in childbirth, not his wife, whom they'd thought to be their mother. He must have loved their real mother so deeply he couldn't bear to talk about her.